The twin suns of Zareth burned high in the lavender sky, casting long, sharp shadows over the arena. Spectators from across the galaxy filled the stands, buzzing in a dozen different languages. The galactic combat games were more than a tradition. They were a ritual of dominance, a spectacle of strength, precision, and pride. This year's event promised even greater intrigue, for it marked the first time a Terran Earthling team had been invited to compete. Whispers had circulated through the cosmic corridors of power for years about these late-blooming humans, how fast they developed, how stubbornly they survived, but no one had yet seen them tested under the eye of the games. Today was the first trial, the sharpshooting challenge. The arena's floor, an enormous metallic disc embedded with shifting panels, shimmered in the sun's heat. Targets hovered and zipped across the field in unpredictable patterns, some blinking, some cloaked, others zigzagging at light-breaking speed. For the seasoned competitors, this was tradition. For the humans, it was an invitation to embarrassment. Captain Isaac Wren stood at the edge of the ring, his boots planted firmly, his face unreadable beneath the dark visor of his helmet. He was the oldest among his team, though barely into his 40s by Earth standards. His grip on the old-fashioned, magazine-fed rifle looked almost comical compared to the sleek, plasma-sheathed weapons of the other species. Around him, his team of 5 stood silent. Their uniforms bore no flashy enhancements, no combat-grade shields, only tight black fabric lined with matte sensor nodes. The alien crowds didn't even bother hiding their laughter. A gelatinous Jarkith delegate burbled in amusement, its skin flashing orange with each wheezing sound. A group of feathered Kavarii soldiers clucked and mimicked human movement with exaggerated flailing arms. Even the commentators joined in. High above the ring, in a hovering booth of glass and chrome, the voice of General Narak boomed. "Behold the pride of Sol 3, he said with mocking grandeur. "Terrans, famous for using rocks as weapons just a century ago, let us see what their rifles can do against moving targets." The crowd roared with laughter and jeers. Cameras panned in on the humans' crude weapons. Projectiles, combustion-driven, no tracking systems, no auto-lock. Isaac didn't flinch. He gave no response to the mockery. Instead, he tapped his comms twice and raised his rifle. The timer began. A series of spherical targets shot across the arena. The other teams had scored near-perfect hits, clean, vaporizing shots to the core of each drone. Isaac squeezed the trigger. The gun fired with a violent mechanical snap that startled some of the more delicate species nearby. The bullet missed by what appeared to be meters. It ricocheted off a panel and embedded itself harmlessly in the arena wall. The cavalry burst into squawking laughter. Isaac calmly reloaded. Another shot, another miss. The second bullet spiraled off course, hitting a support beam high above the field. The rest of the human team took their turns, each producing similarly disappointing results. The bullets flew erratically, veering away from the targets and embedding themselves in seemingly random locations, ceiling joints, access panels, the underside of the arena floor. By the 10th shot, the audience was in hysterics. A blue-scaled Zenthic child was laughing so hard he fell off his floating seat and had to be caught by a security drone. Even General Narak, who typically maintained a thin veneer of diplomatic professionalism, wiped a tear from his eye. "Perhaps Earth misunderstood the rules," he quipped. "This is a precision event, not a demolition exercise." Isaac said nothing. Neither did Lieutenant Morgan, who had delivered a shot that nearly missed the entire arena. The human team simply watched, waited, and reloaded. Their hands moved with mechanical consistency, as if following some invisible rhythm. Among the crowd, not everyone laughed. High Commander Thrial of the Kulari Empire leaned forward, her emerald eyes narrowing as she watched the human footage from her private feed. She had lived through 6 wars and had seen thousands of species under fire. Something didn't feel right. The humans weren't panicking. They weren't adjusting their aim. They weren't even talking to each other. Yet their actions were oddly synchronized. The miss patterns were too precise, too clean. One bullet had clipped the junction box of the arena's secondary grid. Another had dented the panel above a hidden ventilation duct, an area not even visible from the main floor. One shot struck an obsolete section of armor plating, knocking it loose, exposing a section of circuitry beneath. Thrill tapped her assistant and whispered something, sending a stream of queries to the arena's systems team. Back on the field, the announcer declared the round over. 0 hits. Not a single target destroyed. The humans, ladies and gentlemen of the galaxy, have delivered the worst score in game's history. The crowd erupted again. A swarm of drones circled around the human team, projecting their disappointed expressions to the arena's holoscreens. Captain Isaac simply looked up at the nearest camera and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then he turned, walking off the platform with steady steps, his team following silently. In the control booth, a technician from the maintenance crew stared at his console in disbelief. One of the secondary power relays had gone offline. A flicker passed through the lights. A vibration trembled beneath the arena floor, almost too subtle to notice, but noticeable to those who paid attention. Strange, the technician muttered. Those areas they hit. Something shifting underground. The alien laughter continued, but somewhere among the endless rows of seats, a tiny seed of doubt had taken root. The humans hadn't aimed for the targets, that much was clear, but if not for the targets, what were they aiming at? Isaac Wren walked through the underground hallway, his face still hidden behind his visor. When the door to the team's quarters closed behind him, he removed it. His eyes were calm but focused. He glanced at Morgan. "Did we get them all?" She nodded once. "Primary relay, backup grid, cloaking emitter, structural anchor, and signal disruptor. All tagged." "Good," he said. "Phase 2 starts tomorrow." Above them in the arena filled with laughter, no one knew what had just been set in motion. But the humans did. They weren't aiming for the target. The real game hadn't even started. The atmosphere inside the humans' quarters was quiet, but every movement had a purpose. No one spoke unless necessary. The walls were bare, metallic, and slightly curved, like the rest of the artificial architecture burrowed beneath the Xerath Arena complex. The lighting had been dimmed to a muted amber, masking the flickering pulses now running through the auxiliary feeds of the command station in the corner. Captain Isaac Wren stood at the far end of the room, reviewing telemetry from the shots each team member had taken. Behind him, Lieutenant Morgan knelt beside a deconstructed rifle, her fingers moving over its components with practiced precision. Each bullet casing had been marked, each trajectory logged. The miss patterns, those deliberate, seemingly errant shots, were already producing results. A quiet chime came from the console. Morgan didn't look up. "Confirmation," she said. "Cloaking field began destabilizing 3 minutes after our last hit. Signal interference patterns are fluctuating." Isaac didn't reply. His jaw tightened slightly, but his focus remained on the display. Dozens of interconnected schematics floated in the air before him, layered diagrams of the arena's substructure, the energy grid, and a partially decrypted file labeled ARX Black Root Node. He didn't know what the node was yet, but the encrypted warning tag next to it was marked with a council-level threat classification. Morgan finally looked up. Her eyes, pale and sharp, studied him. "We were right," he nodded once. Far above them, beyond layers of reinforced alloy and shielded corridors, the next tournament challenge was beginning. The crowd remained unaware of the arena's flickering stability, though maintenance crews were quietly rerouting power to contain what the officials were calling a system resonance anomaly. No one yet understood that the anomaly had been engineered. Meanwhile, back in the surveillance wing of the arena, High Commander Thrile of the Kulari Empire paced slowly, her tail flicking with restrained tension. Her assistant, a thin, multi-eyed researcher named Varn, tapped anxiously on a crystalline datapad. 3 of the human rounds impacted locations not included in our architectural scans, Varn muttered. "No one should even know those compartments exist." The Threll didn't need confirmation. Her instincts, honed through war and diplomacy alike, were already on high alert. She had seen acts of sabotage before. What unnerved her now was the silence that followed. If humans were acting with malice, where was the chaos? Where were the demands? "Pull up the damage scans again," she ordered. Varn brought them up with a flick of his clawed fingers. The impacts had disrupted micro-resonance fields embedded in the lower strata, fields not included in the standard tournament specs. When she zoomed in, Thrall noticed an energy signature she hadn't seen in over 2 decades, a modulation sequence used by the long-defunct Xerix Dominion. That empire had fallen during the Tarsian collapse, The last known Xerix weapon had been seized and locked under the Council's most secure vault protocol. What was one doing embedded beneath a ceremonial sports arena? Back in the human quarters, Sergeant Lee entered with a controlled stride. He had been reconnoitering the service tunnels that connected the human housing ring to the under-arena access vents. "Found it," he said. Isaac turned his head. "There's an old elevator shaft, decommissioned and half-collapsed, leads down to a heat-shielded vault, entry doors sealed with Xyrix tech." Morgan froze. She looked up sharply. "You sure?" Lee nodded. "Match the glyphs to the old Dominion language matrix. It's not an arena substructure, it's a bunker." Isaac finally exhaled. His suspicions were no longer theory. What had begun as whispers in intelligence briefings had now taken shape in the metal beneath their feet. This wasn't about performance. It wasn't about competition. The games had been built over something ancient, something dangerous, and no one had noticed, or worse, someone had deliberately buried it. He turned to Morgan. "Prepare a thermal sweep of the lower chambers. Look for any signs of fusion activity or radiation variants." She was already on her feet before he finished the sentence. Sergeant Lee moved to the console beside her, syncing his field scanner to the team's systems. A soft hum filled the room as the scans began compiling. Slowly, grainy shapes started to form. A hollow space beneath the arena, reinforced with materials no one used anymore. The edges glowed faintly, not with heat, but with residual power signatures. Morgan frowned. "It's not dead, it's sleeping." Isaac crossed his arms. "Then let's make sure it doesn't wake up." While the humans prepared for covert insertion into the restricted vault, above them the next set of trials concluded. The audience remained in blissful ignorance. General Narak had moved on to mocking a six-limbed rookie from the Pelvaran system who had miscalculated a gravity surge and face-planted during the strength challenge. Everyone laughed. Everyone believed the games were still under control, but Thrial was already making calls. She had requested a private meeting with the Council's internal security minister, though she knew such requests were rarely granted without explanation. She wasn't ready to share her suspicions, not without proof. For now, she monitored the arena from a private feed, watching the humans. They said nothing. Their movements were quiet but exact. Each action, each step was methodical. She recognized it as military discipline. Yet Earth hadn't deployed soldiers. They had sent athletes. She tapped her desk twice. "I want background checks on the entire Earth team, not what they submitted. I want the real records." Back in the humans' quarters, Morgan's console beeped. A flashing line appeared on the scan. "What is it?" Isaac asked. She zoomed in. "Not fusion. Movement. Something's pulsing below the center chamber. Rhythmic." Isaac leaned closer. "Like a power surge?" She shook her head. "More like a heartbeat." Sergeant Lee stepped back. "If that thing's alive..." "It's not alive," Morgan interrupted. "It's old tech, but it's acting like it's waking up." Isaac stared at the line. The pulse was growing. Whatever it was accelerating. The signals were radiating outward in patterns, not just inside the arena, into the communications array, into the feed lines. Someone, or something, was trying to send a message. "Can you jam it?" he asked. Morgan's fingers flew over the interface. "Already on it. But we can't hold it back forever." He turned away, moving toward the lockers at the far wall. He opened his and pulled out a small, compact device that unfolded into a matte black wrist interface. As he strapped it on, he spoke without looking. "Change of plans. We don't wait. We go tonight." Lee hesitated. "Without clearance?" "We never needed it," Isaac said coldly. "We weren't invited to play. We were sent to intercept." Morgan glanced at him, her expression unreadable, but the quiet steel in her voice confirmed her agreement. "Then we'd better make sure we intercept it before it speaks." Silence fell again in the room. Outside, the arena lights flared up in celebration of another species completing a perfect score. Fireworks shot into the sky. The audience clapped and howled in amusement. No one noticed the flicker in the stadium's core. No one heard the low hum rising beneath the arena floor, but the humans did. They had never aimed for the target, because the real threat was buried deeper, and now it was stirring. Night on Zareth didn't bring darkness. The planet's smaller sun dipped below the horizon, but the sky remained bathed in a deep cobalt hue, lit faintly by the swirling gas streams of a nearby nebula. The arena's lights dimmed slightly in what the organizers called rest mode, though a faint buzz of power still pulsed through its structure. Below the surface, beneath metal floors and ancient code, a new rhythm had awakened. A slow, steady beat, mechanical but eerily biological. Captain Isaac Wren moved silently through the maintenance corridor, his rifle slung across his back and his wrist interface glowing faint green. The map projected before his eyes was incomplete, built from fragments they had extracted over the last 2 days. It wasn't enough to know what lay ahead, but it was enough to confirm there was a reason to move. Behind him, Lieutenant Morgan followed closely, her steps light but focused, her pulse steady even as the air around them grew cold. Sergeant Lee, positioned at the rear, swept behind with eyes constantly scanning, his left hand always hovering near the stun trigger at his hip. The corridor narrowed, its walls shifting from modern alloy to something older, darker metal threaded with veins of glowing blue circuitry that hummed softly when they passed. Isaac held up a hand and the team stopped. He tapped his wrist. A pulse scan radiated outward and returned a ripple of feedback. No movement, but temperature variation just beyond the next wall. Morgan stepped forward, brushed her fingers against the seam between panels, and pressed inward. A dull clunk echoed through the passage. The panels slid open, revealing a tight access shaft descending into the dark. Isaac looked down without hesitation. "Rappel," he said. Within seconds, the three of them were sliding down the cable, disappearing into the depths below the arena. The shaft was narrow, barely wide enough for one person at a time, and the air smelled of ozone and dust. A forgotten space untouched by maintenance crews. As Isaac landed first, his boots hit the floor with a metallic thud. The chamber he stepped into was round, the ceiling vaulted, and the walls etched with ancient symbols that shimmered as if alive. Morgan landed behind him, her breath catching for a moment as her eyes scanned the carvings. "Zyric script," she said softly, "but it's mixed. There's human patterning layered on top. Someone's been here after them." Isaac crouched, running a gloved hand over the nearest wall. He traced one of the symbols, feeling the slight heat radiating from it. He had seen this kind of hybrid coding before at the Arctic crash site back on Earth. The Alliance had buried the report. He hadn't. Lee landed last, scanning the air. "Radiation's rising," he said. "Low level, not immediately dangerous, but it's active. Something's charging up." Isaac nodded once and motioned forward. The hallway leading out of the chamber stretched into a descending slope. As the three moved deeper, the blue veins in the walls brightened. Morgan glanced at the readings streaming into her interface. Heartbeat is accelerating again. 4 pulses per second and rising. They reached the end of the corridor. Before them stood a massive door, circular, thick, and sealed shut. Its center bore a glowing emblem that looked like an eye surrounded by fractal lines. Isaac approached it and lifted his wrist. The interface scanned the symbol, hesitated, then emitted a sharp tone. A prompt appeared. "Genetic key required." Morgan stepped forward, confused. "It's biological encryption. Zyric's tech wasn't supposed to have biometric locks. That's new." Lee frowned. "You think it needs a Zyric's descendant?" Isaac shook his head. "No, it was updated." He removed a small capsule from his belt, twisted it open, and extracted a vial of clear serum. He inserted it into a port on his wrist device. The moment it clicked into place, the door responded. Lights flared along its edges. The symbol pulsed red once, then turned green, and the door began to slide open with a heavy grind. Morgan looked at him sharply. "You had access DNA?" Isaac didn't answer. He stepped through as the chamber revealed itself. Inside, the temperature dropped sharply. The air grew thick with charged particles, buzzing faintly in their ears. The room was massive, easily 5 times the size of the arena above, and at its center stood the source of the pulsing signal. A black monolith suspended in midair by thin, oscillating beams of energy. Around it, dozens of smaller nodes hovered, rotating slowly. Strange geometric patterns flowed across their surfaces like water. Morgan approached cautiously. "It's a communications array," she whispered. "But not just local. This is long distance, interstellar, possibly interdimensional." Lee's eyes narrowed. "Then who's it calling?" Isaac circled the monolith. He wasn't as interested in who it was calling as what it was preparing to do once contact was made. He had seen this structure before, on a corrupted feed from the failed Veneri excavation. That project had ended with the sterilization of an entire moon, the incident scrubbed from all official records. Morgan scanned the base, Message queue is building. It's almost at release threshold. Isaac turned. Can you block it? She hesitated. Not without triggering a failsafe. It's got layered redundancies. If I touch the wrong sequence, it'll send everything at once. Lee stepped beside her, watching the numbers rise. Then we need to shut it down manually. Isaac looked around. The power sources were hidden, shielded by reinforced plating. The nodes rotated in rhythmic arcs, too smooth, too controlled. He realized the monolith wasn't just a transmitter. It was alive, in its own way, running on semi-sentient subroutines encoded in ancient Xyrix code. Every response had purpose, every pulse a calculation. Suddenly, the room trembled. A sharp vibration surged through the floor. Morgan's screen blinked red. External interface detected. Someone accessed the monolith remotely. Isaac's voice dropped. From above? Yes, she said. But not from the council feed. It's an unauthorized line, masked by diplomatic credentials. Lee looked up, jaw tense. Someone knows we're here. Isaac gave a curt nod. Then we finish this now. He pulled a compact EMP charge from his pack, calibrated it for a directed burst, and handed it to Morgan. Set it to burn through the neural grid, but leave the casing intact. We don't want this thing exploding. She worked fast, fingers moving with sharp confidence. Her breath fogged the air in front of her as the charge powered up. The pulse would last less than 2 seconds, but it had to be precise. Any mistake could rupture the monolith's core and trigger the failsafe protocol. Lee took position beside the monolith, rifle raised, watching for movement. Isaac stood back, eyes on the central beam, watching the sequence of pulses accelerate again. Faster now. Urgent. Desperate. Morgan locked the charge in place, set the trigger, and stepped back. Ready, she said. Isaac gave a nod. 3, 2, 1. The pulse fired. The sound was deafening. Not loud, but dense, like silence collapsing into itself. The energy beams flickered. The nodes froze mid-rotation. The monolith shimmered, its patterns breaking, scrambling, then vanishing. The pulse light died. Morgan checked her readings. Signal dropped, heartbeat flatlined. Lee let out a breath. It's down. For a moment, everything was still. The hum was gone. The chill lifted. But then, deep below, something shifted. Isaac froze. What was that? Morgan looked at her screen. Power rerouting. Secondary node activating. Another monolith. Isaac clenched his jaw. Lee's voice was sharp. How many? Morgan's answer came as a whisper. At least 4. Scattered across Xereth. And this one just woke them up. Isaac stepped back, fury and resolve burning behind his eyes. We've just scratched the surface. Far above, the arena lights flickered once, unnoticed by the cheering crowds. But the heartbeat had moved, downward, outward, and now it wasn't pulsing alone. The real game was beginning. Isaac stood in the silence that followed the EMP discharge, his breathing shallow, his body tense as the realization sank in. The monolith had only been one part of a much larger network, a system buried beneath Xereth like the roots of a long-dead tree, now twitching with new life. Morgan's readings didn't lie. Multiple signals had stirred the moment the pulse shut the first node down. Not disconnected, synchronized like a hive mind. Lee holstered his rifle and turned to Morgan, who was already back at her terminal, eyes locked on the fluctuating data cascading across her screen. Her lips were pressed into a tight line, but her fingers moved with urgency. She was tracing the energy patterns, trying to triangulate the source of the secondary pulses. Each one echoed outward in perfect succession, traveling through subterranean channels that were never listed on any known schematic. This planet had been built on top of something ancient, something forgotten, or more terrifyingly, something protected by design. The nearest node is 3 kilometers northeast, buried under one of the old maintenance districts, she said without looking up. The rest are scattered across the lower strata, all pulsing now, same frequency, same phase. Isaac tightened the straps on his gear, his voice low. How long before they activate? She hesitated. It's not clear. They're not powering up identically. It's like they're listening, waiting for a trigger. Lee stepped away from the now hapeless monolith. Then we don't give them one. We hit the next one before it finishes whatever it's doing. Isaac gave a single nod, then turned toward the exit, but before he could move, a sudden vibration coursed through the walls, faint but sharp, different from the earlier pulses. This was no internal tremor. It came from above. Isaac tapped his wrist interface. A red alert flickered across the HUD. Localized surface detonation detected. Arena Quadrant 5. Seismic spike confirmed. Morgan's head snapped up. Explosion? Lee's hand went back to his weapon. Could be a containment breach. Isaac narrowed his eyes. Or someone trying to cover something up. The explosion wasn't part of the plan. Their insertion had been silent, their interference cloaked. Whoever had triggered the node externally had just escalated the situation. Isaac stepped into the access shaft, climbing back up the rope with swift, practiced movement. The others followed. As they reached the upper corridor, the distant echo of shouting voices rang through the narrow metal tunnels. Security personnel moving fast, footsteps hurried, orders sharp and confused. When the three emerged into the auxiliary hallway near the arena's eastern supply sector, the scene was already shifting. A squad of armed guards in dark council armor rushed past them, none stopping to ask questions, too focused on reaching the source of the explosion. Smoke was beginning to creep along the ceiling, faint but acrid. Isaac used the chaos to their advantage, moving through shadowed side paths until they reached the corridor overlooking the sector's open-air plaza. Through the reinforced glass, they saw it. A crater at least 30 meters wide had torn through the floor of one of the maintenance bays. Rubble and scorched earth surrounded the impact site. Dozens of drones hovered nearby, scanning the wreckage. Engineers and officials scrambled, trying to understand what had just happened. But Isaac wasn't watching the crater. His eyes were locked on a figure standing on a raised platform beyond the chaos. Tall, cloaked in navy blue diplomatic robes with silver insignia glinting on the shoulders. Her name was Yalira Venthos, senior advisor to the Council's diplomatic corps. She wasn't supposed to be anywhere near this sector. Morgan noticed her too. "That's the one who buried the Venari report," she whispered. "She signed the redaction order." Lee stepped beside them. "Why would she be here?" Isaac didn't answer right away. He watched her speak with urgency to a nearby officer, her face tight with restraint, her gestures clipped. She was too composed for someone caught in the middle of a disaster. She wasn't surprised by the explosion. She had expected it. "We need to intercept her," Isaac said. "Now." Morgan hesitated. "That would expose us." "She'll have diplomatic immunity. She also has answers." Before Morgan could protest, he was already moving, looping around the edge of the sector through back corridors until he reached the plaza's lower access ramp. Yalira had just finished her exchange with the officer and was walking briskly toward her transport shuttle when Isaac stepped directly into her path. She froze, her eyes meeting his. Recognition flickered, followed by immediate alarm. "Captain Wren," she said coolly. "You're not supposed to be here." Isaac said nothing. Behind him, Lee and Morgan emerged from the shadows. Yalira's guards stepped forward, but she raised a hand, halting them. "You've found the node," she said. "Haven't you?" Isaac's silence was confirmation enough. Yalira sighed. "You don't understand what you've tampered with." Morgan stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Then explain it. Because we just shut down something that was preparing to speak with something off-world." Yalira's lips pressed into a thin line. "You think this is about communication? This isn't a beacon. It's a lock, and your interference just weakened it." Isaac felt a chill crawl up his spine. A lock on what? Yalira turned slightly, her eyes scanning the ruins of the crater. Not what. Who? She looked back at him, and for the first time Isaac saw fear in her eyes. Real fear, the kind that came from knowing something no one else dared to speak aloud. "Centuries ago," she said, her voice low, "before the Council unified, the Xyrix Empire discovered something in the void, a being of intelligence and hunger. It could not be destroyed, so they sealed it. Here, under this planet." Lee stiffened. "And the games? A cover," she said bitterly. "A way to protect the vault, disguise the pulses, cloak the real purpose of the arena's infrastructure. The public believes this is a monument to peace. It's really a cage." Morgan's face paled. "You mean the heartbeat isn't the monolith? It's what's inside." Yalira nodded. "And now it knows it's being disturbed." Isaac's mind raced. Everything had just shifted. What had begun as an investigation into a hidden signal had revealed something far more terrifying. An ancient being buried beneath Zareth, contained for centuries, now stirring. He looked at Ylira. "Why didn't the council tell us?" "Because the council isn't unified," she said. "There are factions. Some believe it can be controlled, that it's a weapon. Others want it destroyed, and some want to release it." Lee's jaw clenched. "Then the explosion was a test," she said, "to see how the system would respond if one of the locks failed." Morgan stepped forward. "Then we need to disable the rest, now." Ylira's eyes narrowed. "If you shut the network down completely, it may collapse the barrier. The system has to be stabilized, not erased." Isaac took a step back. "Then we'll stabilize it from the inside." Ylira blinked. "You can't be serious. That chamber is volatile. The systems are alien. You'll trigger—" "I don't need permission," Isaac cut her off. "Just a direction." Ylira hesitated, then reached into her sleeve and handed him a slim crystal drive. "You'll need this to interface with the next node. It'll recognize your command signature." Isaac took it, already turning away. Lee looked at Morgan. "We going in?" She gave a grim smile. "We never left." Without another word, the team disappeared into the smoke and shadow, their destination clear, the second node, 3 kilometers away, where something far older than war or peace was beginning to remember what freedom felt like. The air was heavier the deeper they moved beneath the surface of Zareth. Every step toward the second node felt like a descent, not just into the planet, but into something older than memory. Like the layers of dust weren't just sediment, but the compressed remains of forgotten eras. Isaac moved first, guided by the faint signal pulsing from the crystal drive embedded in his wrist interface. Morgan followed close, her narrowed eyes locked on the fluctuating telemetry. Lee trailed behind, rifle gripped tight, scanning every corridor with the instincts of a soldier who no longer trusted the walls around him. The entrance to the second node was hidden behind a collapsed section of the maintenance tunnels. A recent seismic crack had split the flooring, revealing a path that should not have existed. Isaac dropped first, lowering himself into the jagged break and landing on metal that wasn't Zarithian in origin. The texture was different, less industrial, more organic, almost like it had grown into shape rather than been forged. He turned on his light and swept the beam across a vast circular chamber. At the center hovered a second monolith, this one smaller but active. Pale red energy swirled along its base in slow rotations, like the first stirrings of breath in a creature just waking. But what truly caught Isaac's attention was the structure that surrounded it. A ring of metallic coils, each glowing softly, each connected by pulsing cables leading into the walls. These weren't Xerix in origin. Morgan landed beside him and stared. This wasn't part of the original design. "No," Isaac said. "Someone's been modifying the system, enhancing it." Lee dropped last, landing quietly. "Or preparing it for something else." Morgan stepped forward, already tapping into the local interface, her hands moving in urgent bursts. "I'm in. There's a maintenance subroutine. I think it's trying to prevent something from initiating. It's losing." Isaac pulled the crystal key from his wrist and slotted it into the access port beneath the node. The system resisted for a moment, an almost conscious rejection, but then yielded. The glow shifted from red to white. A pulse rippled outward. The hum deepened. Morgan swore under her breath. That wasn't just a signal, it was a challenge response. Something just answered. The room trembled. From above, a low groan echoed through the walls, as if the planet itself exhaled. And then the voice came. Not through speakers, not through sound, but inside their minds. A presence, malevolent, patient, cold. "You have entered the seal. You have broken silence. I remember." Morgan staggered, clutching her head. Lee gritted his teeth, sweat forming at his brow. Isaac forced himself to stay upright. "You are contained. You will remain so." The voice responded again, deeper now, soaked with hunger. "You do not hold me. You were never meant to. You are not wardens. You are distractions." The monolith shuddered, the cables rattling violently. The metal coils began to vibrate and sparks leapt from their bases. Morgan's screen turned red. Containment failing. Node synchronization at 64%. If we don't stop it now, the entire system will link. The lock will collapse. Isaac drew in a breath, looked at the core, and spoke without hesitation. "We initiate full core inversion." Morgan stared. That'll destroy the node. I know. Lee stepped closer. It'll destroy us too. Isaac nodded. We knew the risk. For a moment, no one moved. Then Morgan turned, pulled the secondary console panel open, and began entering the override codes. Her fingers didn't tremble. She didn't blink. Lee took position near the access port, opening the failsafe switch. The energy in the room screamed. The presence pushed harder, trying to fill the air, the walls, their minds. But it could not move their hands. Isaac took the last position near the monolith's base. He slid open the last panel, revealing the resonance core, a spinning, crystalline engine glowing with furious energy. He placed his hand on the manual ignition lock and looked at the others. On my mark, Morgan nodded. 3, 2, 1. The core fired. The light was blinding. The pulse roared outward, slamming into the monolith, vaporizing the cables, shattering the synchronization signal. The presence howled, inhuman, ancient, and furious, but it was cut off mid-scream. The monolith ruptured. The coils collapsed inward, folding space around themselves in a flash of white implosion. The chamber fell silent. Smoke rose from the edges of the crater where the node had been. The core was gone. So was the signal. Isaac coughed once, his vision swimming, but he was alive. So was Morgan, slumped against a wall, blood trickling from her nose, but conscious. Lee was still on his feet, though one side of his visor had cracked, but he was grinning. It's done, he said hoarsely. Morgan checked the readings. All nodes offline, network severed. The heartbeat is gone. Isaac allowed himself a single breath of relief. Seal reestablished? Morgan gave a slow nod. Stronger than before. The system adapted to the shutdown. It's correcting its own gaps. Whatever that thing was, it can't reach out again. Not from here. Not from anywhere. Lee exhaled. Let's hope it stays that way. They climbed out of the shattered corridor just as the first responders reached the blast site. Yalira met them near the edge, her eyes wide with disbelief. She looked at Isaac, then at the readings from her own interface. Her lips parted, and for a long moment she didn't speak. Then she bowed her head slightly. You saved this world, she said quietly, and maybe more. Isaac didn't respond. He simply walked past her, out into the early light of Xereth's twin dawns. The arena would open later that morning. The games would resume. But no one would speak of what had happened below, of the ancient lock almost broken, or the whispers of the thing that had once stirred. Official reports would cite an underground malfunction. The council would file it under internal restructuring. The truth would remain buried, like the entity it kept caged. But the humans would remember. Morgan, Lee, and Isaac, those who had seen the pulse, heard the voice, and stood against it, would never forget. Not because they feared what had almost awakened, but because they now knew the galaxy had once locked something away, and Earth had been brought to the games not as competitors, but as the last line of defense.